Welcome back, everybody, to Truth About the Harry Quebert Affair by Joël Dicker. We've got the book, we've got some notes, and now it's time to see what we can pull out of this.
It's a big one.
It is a big one. Now, this book, it's a murder mystery, but it's so much more than that. It's got scandal, it's got a famous author, Harry Quebert, who becomes the prime suspect when a young girl's body is found on his property.
Decades later.
Decades later, exactly. And it just so happens that his most famous novel's manuscript is buried with her.
Oh, yeah.
So we're not just trying to figure out who committed the crime, we're also trying to figure out what the manuscript says about Harry and his relationship with this victim, Nola Kellergan. Now, luckily, we have our expert here to help unpack all of this. What really jumps out at you when you think about the setup of this book?
Well, first of all, Dicker doesn't waste any time getting your attention. He throws you right into the thick of it. The discovery of Nola's body with Harry's manuscript, it just casts suspicion on Harry right away. And it really sets the stage for this whole story, where every character, every relationship is kind of shrouded in this doubt.
And then we have Harry's former student, Marcus Goldman, who's also a writer. He's struggling with his own demons, but he's so determined to clear his mentor's name. But what does he find along the way?
It's really interesting. You kind of see Marcus's investigation. It becomes this journey of disillusionment because he starts out idolizing Harry. But as he uncovers more and more information, that image of Harry starts to crumble. It's like watching someone peel back the layers of this persona and you find something much more complicated underneath.
Yeah, and it's almost like the investigation is a metaphor, right? For how we construct our ideas about people, about truth.
Totally. And Dicker really emphasizes that with that fractured timeline. He jumps back and forth between the past and the present, mirroring that fragmented nature of truth. As a reader, you're piecing together this puzzle along with Marcus, so you're constantly questioning everything you thought you knew.
And this brings us to this idea of obsession that runs throughout the whole book. Every character seems to be driven by some sort of obsession.
Oh, absolutely. You see it with Harry and his fixation on Nola, which becomes, the more we learn about their relationship, the more unsettling it becomes. And then there's Marcus with his need to prove Harry's innocence. And then even the town itself is obsessed with this unsolved mystery from decades ago. So Dicker's really showing us how obsession can kind of warp things like love, ambition, even the pursuit of the truth itself.
And speaking of Harry and Nola, their relationship is one of the things that really grabs you and makes you feel uncomfortable because it's so ambiguous.
It is. Dicker doesn't shy away from that at all. He shows their connection as passionate, almost romantic, But then there's this undeniable power imbalance. She's a teenager and he's this much older, established guy. And it really forces you to ask those questions about what the nature of their bond is. Was it love? Was it manipulation? Or was it somewhere in between? And Dicker, he doesn't give us those easy answers. And that's what's so compelling.
Yeah, it's like we're grappling with all these gray areas. It's not always clear who the victim is, who's guilty, and what even happened all those years ago.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if we kind of zoom out and look at the bigger picture, it takes us to the core of what this novel's really exploring, which is the nature of truth. Dicker is asking us to think about how our perceptions and our biases and even our own desires, they shape what we believe to be true. He's really showing us that truth isn't always objective. Sometimes it can be subjective and fluid and really open to interpretation.
And we also see how fame impacts both Harry and Marcus.
Right.
And for both of them, it's kind of a double-edged sword.
Yeah, it's the glare of the spotlight. And Harry, built on the success of his books, it kind of becomes his downfall. He's under all this scrutiny, and the public is ready to pounce at any moment.
Yeah.
But then you have Marcus, who's paralyzed by the pressure to replicate his early success, and he might even be tempted to use this tragedy for his next book.
So both of them are dealing with fame in very different ways. One's almost destroyed by it, and the other one might use it for his own personal gain. And it all comes back to that question, if truth is so subjective and so slippery, can we ever really get the whole picture?
That's what Dicker wants us to think about. He reminds us that even in a murder mystery, where you're looking for those concrete answers, things aren't always black and white.
And he does that by giving us these glimpses into different characters' memories of Nola and the events leading up to her disappearance.
That's where his genius shines through. He uses those fragmented memories to really blur those lines between truth and perception even more.
And this is where it gets really unsettling because each person's memory is clouded by their feelings and their prejudices and maybe even things that they wish they could forget.
Exactly. They're all holding a piece of a shattered mirror, but none of them reflect that whole picture. And it reminds us that memory itself isn't this perfect recording. It can change, it can be influenced, and it definitely gets distorted over time.
So we end up questioning not only the characters' versions of what happened, but memory itself, which just takes us right back to that theme of truth being so elusive.
Right back to the core. It's brilliant because he's making us challenge what we think we know and pushing us to think critically about everything we're reading and experiencing as we go.
And this is something that sticks with us as we kind of go deeper into the novel.
Absolutely. Dicker's not just writing an exciting mystery. He's inviting us into this conversation about truth, memory, and the stories we tell ourselves.
And speaking of stories, we have to talk about Marcus and his struggle as a writer, because he's feeling this pressure to create another hit. And he might actually use Harry's tragedy to write his next book.
And that brings up a really interesting question about the ethics of storytelling itself. Where do you draw the line between finding inspiration from real life and exploiting someone else's pain for your own gain?
It's a tough one, right?
It is.
Because writers get inspiration from the world around them all the time. But at the same time, there's a certain sense of responsibility, especially when you're dealing with something as real as this.
And Dicker really wants us to think about that tension. It's not about having a right answer. It's about realizing there's a power dynamic there. Who gets to tell the story? Whose voices are amplified? And whose voices end up being silenced in that process?
It's almost like he's shining a light on the whole publishing industry and maybe even society as a whole.
Exactly. And that's why the truth about the Harry Quebert affair is so much more than just a mystery. It's a conversation starter about how we interact with these narratives, not just in fiction, but in our own lives.
Wow, we've covered a lot, and we're just getting started.
We've only just begun.
Yeah, there's so much more to uncover.
So much more to unpack. He's saying, don't just take everything at face value. You really got to dig deeper.
Which is so important, right? Especially these days when there's so much information coming at us. You can easily just accept whatever story sounds good, but you have to take a step back and look at things from different perspectives. That's where you can really get a better understanding.
Exactly. And that's what's so cool about the truth about the Harry Quebert affair. Dicker doesn't just give you the answers. He gives you the pieces and lets you figure things out on your own.
So with everything we've talked about so far, the murder mystery, obsession, truth, memory, even the ethics of writing stories, what do you think is the main takeaway for us as readers?
Well, I think Dicker really wants us to be critical thinkers, to question what we read, what we hear, and even what we remember, and to realize that our own perceptions can shape how we see the world. But maybe most importantly, to remember that there's more than one side to every story.
It's like he's giving us this toolkit to help us understand all the complicated parts of life, not just in the stories we read, but the stories we tell ourselves.
Exactly. And a book like this makes you think about your own life. It makes you think about your own biases and how they affect how you see things.
This conversation is making me want to reread the book. But before we go, is there one thing you would like to leave the listeners with? Something they can think about as they keep exploring their own worlds of stories and truth?
If I had to pick one thing, I would say, don't be afraid to question the narratives you encounter. It doesn't matter if it's the news or history or even just something someone tells you. Always remember that there's always more than one perspective.
That's such a good reminder. It's so easy to get caught up in a good story, but we have to take that step back, look at it from different angles.
Absolutely. And that's what Joël Dicker does so well. He doesn't tell us what to think. He just wants us to think critically.
This has been a really insightful deep dive. Thank you so much for helping us unpack all the layers of this book.
It's been my pleasure. It's always fun to talk about a book that makes you think so much.
Makes you realize that even our own memories can't really be trusted.
That's so true. I mean, think about it. Someone who's been betrayed by someone might read Harry's story and be way more cynical, but someone who's struggling to write, they might connect with Marcus's struggles. It's like Dicker made this mirror with so many sides. It shows something different to every single reader.
So it's not just the characters' memories we have to think about, it's our own memories and how they affect how we see the story.
Exactly. That's what makes this book so powerful. It doesn't just tell us a story. It wants us to really think about it, to ask questions, and to see things from different perspectives. And then we get to figure out what we think is true.
I'm so glad we had this conversation. Thank you so much for helping us understand the truth about the Harry Quebert affair.